Welcome back, Mobile Home Park Nation. Ferd Neiman here again today with another episode of the Mobile Home Park Lawyer Podcast. Got a great guest for you today. He's a mobile home park owner-operator. He's a syndicator. He's a podcaster. Great all-around MHP guy. Please help me welcome my guest, Kevin Bupp. Kevin, how
Hey,
you doing?
Ferd, I'm doing great, bud. Thanks for having me here. Excited to be here. We finally got this thing done. I know I've had to reschedule a few times, but we're finally here, and that's all that
Hey,
matters.
it happens. I've had coming. You've been like the star power for my newsletter for like a month. I'm like coming soon, Kevin Bupp, coming soon, and then
Oh
and we
gosh.
haven't done it yet.
Okay.
So I'm glad we got this on the calendar. I know about you. I see, listened to your podcast, read some of your stuff, obviously followed some of your deals. Most of our audience probably has too, but in case they haven't, maybe tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into MHP, and kind of what you're doing today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I try to keep this somewhat high level, but I've been a full-time real estate investor in many different capacities now for 20 years. So I'm 40. I always forget my age half the time. I'm 40. I just turned 42. But I got introduced to real estate at the age of 19. Bought my first single family property at the age of 20. And just like a lot of folks, started out with single family, and that's what my mentor had taught me. That's what he did. I didn't reinvent the wheel. I just literally followed his model, which was small multifamily and single family rentals, long-term rental portfolio, and ultimately did that for my early to mid 20s, built up pretty substantial holdings of single family properties, about 122 when the market finally crashed, but owned hundreds of them over the years. And then also started buying multifamily as well. This is prior to 2008. I kind of like to break up my experience in two different sectors, like pre 2008, then post 2008. And so, pre 2008 owned big portfolio, single family, multifamily, and some miscellaneous commercial properties. And then basically had a reset, had a reset in 2008, and kind of went on a couple year hiatus, started a few other businesses outside of real estate. But the fire of real estate never really left my belly. And ultimately I decided that, getting back into it, I really wanted to rebuild with something that was more efficient. And I kind of saw some of the pitfalls with the single family stuff, just the amount of energy and effort it took to build that size of portfolio, which isn't really even all that big, that I could literally compound that by 10x, if not more, with multifamily. But that's kind of how I accidentally fell into mobile home parks. I went on a kind of a journey, 2010, 2011, just really talking to everyone I could that was still in the either got into the multifamily space post crash or survived during the crash and was still buying multifamily, because the world had changed at that point. Debt was very different. There was still a lot of blood in the streets, a lot of distressed projects out there. And so it was a very different world than pre 2008. And so during this little journey of mine, I was introduced to a guy by the name of Randy, and Randy actually was here local in Florida. Randy had been a banker for 30 years, and Randy had a lot of clients that owned and operated mobile home parks and RV parks here in Florida. And his story goes that, after, a couple decades of financing them and seeing how much money basically my clients were making when I retired, he had a, good bit of savings, and he deployed a couple $1 million and bought a couple mobile home parks here in Florida. And ultimately he had lunch with him, and he was very high on mobile home parks, and it had been an asset class I'd never considered. And that 2-hour meeting essentially intrigued me enough to where it led me to kind of commit myself internally to buy my first mobile home park. So we bought the first one back in 2012 after about a year of looking and making offers and backing out, getting cold feet, making offers, and then finally closed on one, and literally owned that one up until January of this year. We just sold that one January of 2020. So we've been buying parks now for, so I guess you could say, going on a decade. It's been quite a number of years, and own parks today in 13 states. And in addition to mobile home parks, one of the things that we started buying as of recently are also parking assets. And so, parking lots and parking garages. So that's aside from mobile home parks, but those two assets are kind of our bread and butter and our core right now.
That's great. No, I want to talk about parking too, because I've seen you post a lot of stuff on LinkedIn and social media about the
Mm-hmm.
parking. And when I used to practice at a law firm in Kansas City, and there was a guy that made a ton of money buying parking lots in distressed areas that were gentrified, and he bought them for nothing. They were limited cash flow, but cash flow. And then he ended up building office buildings. I ended up building condo buildings. And he's a high school graduate that went from 0 to 100 million in net worth in 10 years. And buying parking lots was crucial to that. And he's just a true hustler. But
I feel
Yeah,
like that's
definitely.
like the mysterious story that you used to hear about mobile home parks. I knew a
Yeah,
guy that knew a guy,
yeah.
and
No, I knew
he
this
like
guy. I knew this guy. This
it was
guy's
very
real. I swear.
it was very cryptic, and I know, but I mean,
Yeah,
mobile home parks used to be very cryptic because like no one
yeah,
really ever knew anybody that owned one, or I never even considered that asset. I never considered that asset class. I didn't go to lunch with Randy because I wanted to learn about mobile home parks. I just enjoy meeting new people. One of my friends was like, you should go have lunch with Randy. He's a really smart guy. He's local, and he's a fun
yeah.
conversation. And I left that conversation basically committing myself to go buy a mobile home park because he got me so excited about him. So now the whole world knows.
Yeah, the secret's out. Tell Randy, guys like me and you are ruining it for everybody else by
Yeah,
telling everybody
exactly.
about it. But that's part of capital raising, right? You got to tell the story. But unfortunately, the secret's out. And I wish I'd have found it a few years earlier. But it sounds like your banker did. That's good for him.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've talked to your share of bankers too. I know my first syndication deal, I went to like, I don't know, 6 or 7 banks, and they didn't say no. They said hell no on trailer parks.
Yeah.
And then I ran into a banker, and this was like the deal was 1.3 million, so the loan was about 1 million. And I said, I'd like to get. I had seller finance back. I teed up. The seller was willing to finance it, but he wanted 40% down. He was going to carry 60. So I was like, well, that's a lot of equity. So it would have been better if I get traditional bank finance. So I went to the bank, and one bank told me yes, but we need 50% down. And I said,
Oh
well,
my
that's
gosh.
non-starter, because I can get 40% down with the seller, no appraisal, no fees, no longer term, longer fixed rate. I'm not. So I said no. And then I ran to another bank, and I asked the guy, I said, hey, before we get going, I need at least 70% LTV, maybe 75. And then if you're willing to do that on a mobile home park, then let's talk. And he said, hell, I'll give you 80. I said, what? He goes, the richest guys I know are mobile home park owners. The best loans I've
Yeah.
ever made are the mobile home park owners. He goes, before I came to this bank, they never did them. He owned a different bank, brought it in. He goes, and in fact, he goes, I got $2 million signature authority, so consider yourself approved. I was
That's awesome.
30 seconds in. He's like, there
Yeah.
you go. After hearing no for the last 3 weeks, so
Yeah.
it was nice to run to a banker that got it.
Absolutely.
More
I
and more
think
do.
I think that was one of the biggest challenges that we faced in the earlier years of our business. Banged my head against the wall, hundreds of times trying to get financing for some smaller deals. Especially if the loan amount was under $1 million.
Sure.
Banging on door, going and calling on basically every local bank in the area, and it was literally a crapshoot as to whether or not you might find that one banker that actually got it. Many of the challenges is that many of these local banks, if you talk to one of the loan originators, I mean, loan originators are sales guys. They sell loans, but they don't really have signatory power to basically commit to a deal. They've got to go in front of a committee, but they'll tell you anything that you want to hear as far as, yeah, we'll do that deal. Absolutely. We'll do that deal. We'll give you, I mean, they'll make promises that a lot of times, sometimes they can keep, but a lot of times things fall apart once it gets committee. And now you're 3 weeks into the process and your due diligence time has been eaten up. And so, a lot of challenges back in the day. However, I think now there's many, many more options as far as, local, regional, national banks that get this space, that understand it, that are willing to lend in it. So very different times nowadays than what it was 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the good changes in the last 5 or 6 years
Sure.
has been lending. Obviously, the downside of all this popularity is there's a lot more people competing over deals, a lot of private equity, a lot of REITs, a lot of just
Hmm.
investment groups in general. Is that what you're seeing in the states that you're in as far as the marketplace? Is just a new froth of buyers looking to get into the space?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've actually exited out of a few properties over the last year and a half. And so, and most of the buyers have been, I wouldn't say new to the business, but I mean, the last 2, 3 years, and a couple of them being larger groups that have, acquired fairly substantive portfolios here over the last couple of years. They've been doing it. Some of it being institutional money, some pension fund money, things of that nature. So just a very different type of player than what I had experienced 7 or 8 years ago getting into the space.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I've seen it, when we're trying to buy deals, and I've been off by
Hmm.
half. I'm like, what do you mean you're paying that much? I know the numbers too much. Like, it's not worth that. I've had guys overbidding like crazy on some of these projects, and yeah, we're like, you're selling a few. I've got a couple we're getting ready to sell, a couple refinancing right now. But one particular, I've only owned it for it's been 5 months, and the market's crazy hot there. And like, you know what? If people are going to pay, people are paying right now on some markets on pro forma rents.
Yeah.
$100 pro forma rents extra, and then cap rates in the fives or lower. It's like, dang, that's a
Yeah.
pretty strong valuation.
Yeah, and I don't know who's right or wrong there. I will say that some of the assets that we exited out of, I would never have been a buyer at that price point, and that's even me intimately knowing the asset. Like I would not even been close to a buyer at what they sold for. I know how difficult some parks are to run. This it's not an easy business. Some parks are easier than others, but it's not an easy business. I mean, there's lots of moving parts to it. It's a very operationally intensive to a certain extent. Now if you have a 55 plus 100% tenant owned home, 4+ star community, even they have their headaches, but that's about as clean as it gets. But if we're talking, the typical 2.5, 3 star, C plus class community, there's just a lot of moving parts to it. And you know, not being able to hand off the management, third party management, and having to have that in house, you got to have a substantive portfolio in order to even justify having it in house. And so you go through this weird growing phase where if you're just starting to buy parks now and you're having to pay 5 caps for these things for like 2.5, 3 star parks, and you're buying on pro forma, it's going to be very difficult for you to make money. It just is. Again, I guess it's hard to argue that because maybe there's plenty of other people smarter than you and I, right?
Right.
But I'm just speaking to the assets that we've sold off. I know them intimately. We've owned them for a number of years. I know the tenant bases. I know the market, and I struggle to see how some of these are going to actually make anything more than maybe a 6% cash on cash return on a C grade asset. To me, that's just not enough reward for the risk and the amount of time that would go into run an asset such as that. So, but I guess to each his own. Everyone's chasing
Right.
yield, and it's hard to get it out there right now. So, folks are willing to sacrifice and take much lower yields, even on those lower quality parks. So, but I think that's been our biggest challenge over the past year and a half. I mean, we've got outbid so many times I can't even count anymore. And
Yeah.
and even stretching a little bit out of our comfort zone, even still getting outbid by 10%, a substantial amount. But I've learned over the years going through the crash. I mean, you really got to stick to your criteria, especially during times like this. I remember rolling through 2006, 2007, just watching everyone think that if you didn't buy today, there's gonna be nothing left thereafter. And there's typically always some type of reset. There's folks that are buying parks today that unfortunately won't be able to meet meet their projections, and have challenges down the road. I don't wish that on anyone, but it
Right.
will occur, especially when you're buying with such thin margins of safety.
I agree completely. And I think that to your commenters or somebody else, not that they're right or wrong, but I think there's the key is different investment metrics, different yield
Mhm.
portfolio in need. I mean, I've got a couple of investors. I got one client that I'm like, you're never going to fund this deal. And he funded it in like 5 minutes. And he's like, you don't get it. My investor context are looking for safety of capital. They're already maxed out their 401k. They're already maxed out their
Yeah.
IRAs. They're already maxed out. They've already got the lake house. They've already got the big house. They've already got a ton in the stock market. They're like, I'm looking for something. They've already got. They're leery of retail right now. Industrial's got low yield. Office is kind of shaky right now.
Hmm.
Multifamily's got low yield relative to the quality of the asset in a lot of markets. So mobile home parks, it's a compression of cap rates and yield for some properties, but they're like, hey, it's still the best thing we can do, and it's a diversification and it's a long term play. So I was like, okay, you guys have underwritten. If you guys have analyzed this, you have a different yield requirement than me, because you mentioned the 6% cash on cash. That doesn't get me out of bed in the morning, but I don't have $10 million laying around in a checking account to where I'm collecting zero and negative
Yeah.
with inflation. So there's some guys like spoke to somebody today. I got 35 million in liquid checking. I'm like, okay, you need to go place it somewhere. You need to get that going, man. And obviously that guy's made a lot of money. So who am I to tell him how to spend it,
Sure.
right? For sure. But no, that's definitely. I think we're seeing the same things in the marketplace. But I like your comment, and you obviously went through the recession there in the single family space, but of seeing other people take a bath on properties. I think we're going to see that in MH because there's people paying. I think the market's strong and market characteristics are strong and will be forever. But some of these price points relative to the risk, what's your refi rate? And I've got some clients I'm trying to get them to pump the brakes. Like you're not going to be able to do a 75% LTV cash out 1 year from now with a local bank on your first deal. I know your spreadsheet shows that, but
Hmm.
it's not going to happen. I've been told no on that, and I got more deals and more balance sheet and more experience, and they're not good for me. So, and then that timeline, so you got to just be more conservative in general is kind of how I try to preach it. But
Yeah.
to each their own. Right?
Well, I think some of the other risks associated with it that folks don't think of is, and I can tell you from personal experience as, when you talk about buying on future projections or future pro forma of, this is $100 under market. I know in theory, it is just as simple as going in and literally, giving out whatever the legally required notice is, 30 days, 60 days, that we're raising your rent $50 and doing that 2 years in a row. But I can tell you that more and more common, there's a lot of energy behind residents throughout multiple states. There's community organizations that are really fighting back against manufactured housing, and I can tell you that we've even had challenges over the last couple of years doing what I would consider to be a minimal increase when it's major lender market, $25 or $30, and receives pretty significant blowback. I mean, we went through a situation a few years back in New York where we had a rent strike, because we raised rents and it was very costly. So. And there's lots of traction that certain residents in certain states are getting with these different organizations, nonprofit organizations that are fighting for residents and fighting against landlords and park owners, to keep their rents or to enforce some type of rent control, what have you, keep them at a minimum. And so, that's a real risk, both from a legal perspective. If you get tied up in some type of litigation or a rent strike, or even from a PR perspective, right? I mean, it's, news stations are just hungry for that type of content. And so just be wary of that when you look at something you're underwriting and saying, hey, I'm going to pay for the value today because I'm going to get to that $100 increase in the next year or 2 years. I'm going to push it hard, and just know that there's some potential downsides and blowback that might come as a result of that.
Agreed. And I mean, even on top of that, one of my concerns is other people ruining it for me, not just on your own PR, but
yeah,
we bought a park in Iowa recently, and it's significantly below market rents. But there's somebody else in Iowa that bought up like 15 parks in the same county, bought them all, and then increased the rent from $250 to $500 overnight.
Oh man,
and
they're
getting so now all of a sudden rent control is a viable risk all of a sudden. Because like if there's bad, I don't increase rent like that, but there are people doing it. It's like you're going to ruin it for everybody. Like get to 500 in 5 years, maybe longer, but like don't get there overnight. Don't get there in 60 days. So that's another risk of almost the game theory, if you will, of what's the other guy going to do? But like I'm not saying we should all collude on pricing, but I don't think anybody should try to gouge the tenants. One, because it's morally wrong, but two, is strategically it's a poor business play long term for the industry.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I know the group you're speaking of, and we're not going to name names here, but yeah, they did it in Iowa, and it was pretty drastic, the most drastic rent increases I've ever seen before, ever. I mean, I think it was anywhere between 60 and 100% rent increases shortly thereafter acquisition.
Yeah.
So across thousands of lots, I believe.
Right. It's definitely, it makes me nervous and also for reputation. I mean, mobile home parks, manufactured housing community, if you will. Now
they already have a bad reputation to start with.
Have come a long. Well, they've come a long way from trailer parks, but we ain't there yet. And it's moves like that are one step forward, 2 steps back. Now that the professionalization of management, more lending opportunities, national lenders, national investment groups, professional buyers, all make the industry better and better for the residents as well. But when you get 1 or 2 bad apples out there gouging rents, it's like you're gonna hurt it again. And well, I'm sure you saw when Elizabeth Warren was running for president, and she was bad naming Frank Rolfe and some of these other big players, and it's on John Oliver's show and all this stuff that like we're payday lenders. And I'm like, we're not payday lenders. We're providing quality affordable housing that's unsubsidized. That is as far as I can tell, necessary in every community in the country.
Yeah,
there's a shortage, which the underlying macroeconomics of the industry. There's demand, and there's a shortfall. There's some supply demand gap, if you will. So, what do you think you're going to see? What do you think we're going to see on consolidation? I'm interested in your opinion on that, because you got a good pulse on this.
It's already happening. It's already, I think it's just a matter of time. I mean, now it's just timing, because it's already there's plenty of groups that are running at consolidation. In fact, I know multiple groups. When we talk about people that we think that they're overpaying for an asset, I know multiple groups that are, they are not purposely necessarily overpaying, but they're paying a higher amount than anyone else. But their whole objective is to consolidate a portfolio and then sell it at a premium cap rate to one of these larger institutions. And so they're essentially overpaying for pretty much every asset, but as a bundle can get some type of compressed cap rate on the exit side and justify that consolidation and that portfolio sale. So and there's multiple groups out there doing that right now. And so, I mean, as far as like the overall picture of consolidation, I don't know what the time frame looks like, before. I don't think everything will ever be consolidated because there's always still going to be parks that don't necessarily fit the size criteria for a larger professional or institutional investor, or in the right marketplace. There's going to be still plenty of like tertiary and very rural markets where parks exist that a professional operator is not really going to have an interest in owning. And then aside from that, there's always going to be operators that just don't do a good job of running parks. I mean, to where they get into the space. Again, it's not rocket science, but it's also not super straightforward and easy. I mean, there's unique intricacies and idiosyncrasies that exist in this particular niche. And so I think that there will always be available parks, just probably less than maybe what there are today as far as trading hands. And a lot of that I think will be just mismanagement, pure mismanagement, which will always exist. But I can already see that the consolidation is consolidation paired with incredibly historically low interest rates and really a good available debt now for parks. That consolidation is happening incredibly fast. So you and I were just talking about this before we started recording. I mean, over the last year and a half, it's become incredibly more difficult to find what you or I might determine as a fair deal. Not stealing it, not buying it way below market, but a fair deal that's in a good marketplace. And those are challenging to find today, and I think it's only going to get more challenging here over the coming years. So time will tell. I think that I am a firm believer in that there's always opportunity out there if you're willing to dig a little harder than the next person. I think that's where the relationships come into play. There's still tons of mom and pops. It's still a fragmented industry. So,
Right.
that's where these long-term relationships and rapport come into play. And we've fostered deals. I think the longest one that ever took us from like initial contact to close was nearly 3 years. It was a very long time.
Sure.
So that deal cycle is pretty long. And so you can still find those, because there's plenty of sellers out there that want to sell. They want to sell at a fair price, but they also want to sell to someone they like, and
Exactly.
ultimately might not choose to sell to a larger professional institutional player from New York or Boston or something like that. They'd rather sell to someone that they like and trust, and that could be possibly you if you put the time and energy into building that relationship. So I think those will always be there, at least for the coming decade or two. But sooner or later, a big portion of the industry, just like a multifamily, will be consolidated by the bigger players.
No, I agree. I think that's a great synopsis of where the market's at. I agree. The maybe one addition I would have on the ones that are not going to get consolidated is there's going to be that crotchety old man that's never going to sell at any price, and then you got to deal with his kids or grandkids or state. I mean, I've run into a few of those guys who are like, "Get off my property! I'm never going to sell." And you can't even get to them. But those are where the deals are, because eventually some of those guys do, as you mentioned, like build rapport. And I try to separate myself. Like, look, I can't pay you the most. I'm not the richest guy in the world, and I'm not the biggest outfit in the world, but I'll take care of the property. I'll take care of your tenants. I'll be fair. I'll do what I say I can do and try to set myself apart like that. And
Yeah.
you mentioned 3 years. My dad found a deal. It was in our hometown. It's a nice park. It was 90 pads, concrete roads, carports in every house, double wides, garages on several of them. And we're in the process of expanding another 13. So it'll be over 100 pads.
Mm-hmm.
So we really wanted this park. It was a nice park. And my dad called the guy every 3 months for 5 years. And in most time he's hard to reach. Most time he said, let me get my paperwork together. No, I don't want to sell. I don't want to. And he was a crotchety old, he wasn't even that old actually. He's 60 going on 100, but he was just a grumpy old man. And finally he said, here's the price. And, not a penny off, and it was a fair price. And we're like, we bought it, right? And it was like, but it took literally years and years of follow up, and he had no sign. He lived in the park, and he had a sign on his door. He had a rent box, and he had a sign on his door that said, "Tenants, residents, do not bug me. Do not knock on the door." So
I love it.
He was like that hard to get a hold of, and as a result, everybody else in the country wasn't able to get to this guy. And we were local, and he was a farmer, we were able to get to him, and the rest is history, as they say.
Very interesting. That's awesome. I love the grumpy old guys. I love once you finally break through to them. It's a very rewarding experience.
It's definitely, it's not easy, but it's definitely fun. So maybe you can tell us a story or two of one of your best moves you've made on a deal, or maybe your biggest mistake, and help our audience. Like, oh, don't do this. I forgot to get to phase one, and now I'm paying the EPA out the nose. Or I assume you didn't make that mistake, but
Yeah,
but
thank God we
but if
didn't
you
we didn't
did,
make that
you got away
mistake.
with it. I mean, I know lots of people don't buy a phase one, and then it works out. But then sometimes you hear an
Yeah.
occasional horror story where people are like, oh, it didn't work
That's actually that's a good topic to talk about. So we've never had a dirty well, we've never purchased a park that has had a dirty phase one. However, we've never gone to due diligence with a park that or without getting a phase one inspection done. There was a park in Pennsylvania, actually my hometown, which I was kind of excited to buy because it was decrepit and it was in a great part of town. And I was excited to kind of like, spruce up something where I grew up. My family and all that still lives there. But anyway, um, the front of the property had an old service station from, I mean, literally hadn't even been in service since like the 60s. It had like a couple commercial buildings. One was a tire shop, one was a service station. Service station literally had been a landscape building for the last like 30 years. And we didn't even know it was a service station. Anyway, we did a phase one and found a number of different points of the property that had contamination. Well, we ended up doing a phase two because we found some reason to go that further distance, and ultimately, it would have been a pretty significant cleanup. And we spent a good bit of money, getting to that point and tried to renegotiate. We were still willing to buy it, but at a significant discount. I mean, we're talking a couple $100,000, and basically you're buying liability at that point in time. And so we couldn't strike a deal and we walked away. But that would have been based on the size of that deal and the cost of the remediation efforts, that would have absolutely crushed somebody's returns, or they would have got caught up in a massive lawsuit and legal costs that would have far exceeded the cost of even remediating the property. And so, that money that we spent on that phase one and we did a limited phase two until we got to the point where we're like, okay, this is going to be either it's going to be costly and let's start the negotiations, retrade with the seller. And then he was a grumpy old man, crotchety old man. I'm like, I don't know what you're going to do, buddy. Like whoever buys this from you is going to have the same issues. And now you have to disclose it because we've uncovered it. So,
right.
you're kind of in a predicament. And so you should probably just sell it to us because we're going to clean it up. We're going to do our thing. And I think he ended up selling someone else a couple years later, but in any event, we didn't buy it and we saved ourselves a lot of headache on that property. Another story, the first park we bought is an interesting story. Actually, I'd say the first park we didn't buy is even a more interesting story. And this was back in 2011. We had made a number of offers, but we had a park here under contract in Florida. And it was a listed park. Back then, you'd see things listed here and there every once in a while that actually made sense. Not really any longer. You're not going to see stuff on LoopNet that probably makes any sense. But we put this park under contract with 77 spaces in Florida, Central Florida, city water, city sewer. Had not bought a park yet. Kind of had a mentor, had gone to Frank and Dave's course, this, that, and the other, but so had not bought a park. I've done hundreds of renovations. I've owned apartment buildings, but this park, number one, it was like a tertiary market. But now I know like a number of Florida tertiary markets, I'm very comfortable buying in. This one, I just didn't know all that well. The part that really got me at this park, this is where I got cold feet. Basically, put under contract, 600 grand, 77 spaces, 75 of the 77 occupied. There was about 16 or 17 vacant park-owned homes. Some needed pretty significant repairs, probably on average 10K a piece, 10 to 12K a piece. The part that I got cold feet on wasn't the renovations. It wasn't even really the market. I felt that there was sufficient demand in that market and that we would be able to do this deal. We had owner financing structure as well with some very attractive terms. But the part that got me was the current lot rents on the remaining tenant-owned homes. So the remainder of the homes in that park, aside from those vacant park-owned, were all tenant-owned, but their lot rents were like, they were 140 or 160. I forget. They were incredibly low. And the market was like 300. Easily 300. And based on his ask, and based how the park was being run and the cost we'd have to put into renovating those homes, back then you expected to get double-digit cash on cash returns. That's just how things were bought, right? And so, but the only way that this park made sense is if we could go in and do like an initial like $30 or $40 jump after whatever the first couple months doing some improvements, what have you. And I couldn't get comfortable in the fact that I might lose people, that I might lose residents if I do that big of a jump. And that ultimately we had to be able to get in a couple of years to market in order for this thing to be an absolute home run. And I got cold feet. I just did, to me, it wasn't a home run unless I could do that. And we backed out of the deal. And about 2 weeks later, I came to a realization that I'm an idiot and that I should have actually bought it. And I called the broker back up and I said, "Hey man, I'll let my money go hard right away." He's like, "I'm sorry, man. We literally just signed a contract yesterday on it." And I ended up interviewing that guy on my mobile home park podcast about 3 years ago. Somehow I forget how he heard me tell this story and he reached out to me. He's like, "Hey, I'm the one that bought that park." And
I made $1 million or something like
yeah,
that.
So he paid 600 for it, what I paid. And he renovated all the park owned homes that were in there that were vacant. And I mean, he had sold this thing even a year prior to us doing the show. And he probably shouldn't have but he sold it. He paid 600, probably put like another 200, 250 into it between roads and some tree work and those park on home renovations. I forget where he got rents up to. I think he ended up getting rents to maybe 240 over, 2 or 3 years. And he sold for 1.8. That park today easily would trade for $3.5 million. Easily trade for $3.5 million. So that's the one deal I kicked myself in the ass for. And there's at some point in time, and I'm not really risk adverse for the most part. I'm pretty calculated. And that one, like all the signs were there that I should do the deal.
Yeah.
And I just if I had a person say, "If you don't do it, I'm doing it," and they truly said that, I would have done the deal. But I didn't know that there was that much to me. I didn't know it was going to get eaten up that fast. And ultimately it just, I never made a mistake again. When you got to trust your gut, and my gut was telling me to do it and I didn't do it. And so, one other funny story I'll share real quick is with the first park we actually finally did buy. This is a very distressed park up in Atlanta. It's one we just literally sold January this year. It's a 34 space park. Found that one on LoopNet as well. Again, interesting. It's only 2 parks. Actually, I've found 3 parks over my lifetime that we ended up buying on LoopNet. This is the second one that we've ever found. And it was an REO, had been in court receivership for, I think, 2 years when we found it. A local realtor, residential realtor had it. He had never sold a mobile home park or commercial property before. The listing was horrific on LoopNet, which is what attracted me to it. It literally had one picture, which was an aerial shot. It had no financials attached, not even a summary of like how many park owned. It didn't say what the rents were. It didn't say anything. I mean, maybe I had a sentence or two. And I called the guy and first thing I did is I looked at it on Google Earth. I looked at the Google Earth area and I'm like, man, these homes look actually fairly new. This is so strange. And I said, what's the occupancy? He's like, there's a couple people in there. I'm like, what's that mean? He's like, there's maybe 2 or 3 that are in there living. I'm like, well, the rest of the units. And I was like, who owns these? He's like, I think they come with the park. I'm like, you think or I was like, and so I found out that all these homes, every single one of them came with the park. And these were all like 2005, 2006 homes. And this is back in like 2012. So these homes were only
why are they vacant? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah. The story. So I'll give you the background of the story, at least what we heard from the local city as far as who the owner was. He was a local slumlord, owned a couple mobile home parks, trailer parks in the area. And this park had been in pretty horrific shape, had old rundown, beat up homes in it, lots of drugs, just bad elements. And this was that guy's kind of MO. This is what he had done in his other parks. And at that point in time, one of the major hurricanes had passed. I forget which one it was, but there was a lot of FEMA trailers coming on the market for auction, not travel trailers, but 2 and 3 bedroom, single wides. And basically he had a line on an auction and knew that he can go buy basically 34, fairly new at that time, single wides for a good price. And so he got approval from the county to replace those old homes. They required that he put new roads in, new water and sewer lines. He ended up taking a loan of like $1.6 million on this property to do all this infrastructure improvements, bringing these homes. And then he just continued in his old ways and ran it like a slumlord. So very quickly he defaulted on this note, and he couldn't maintain that debt load on it because again, he wasn't doing a good job running the property. So anyway, went back to the bank. We bought it. And so, but how I looked at it, they were asking originally $500K for the property. Even at that number, I looked at it and I was like, even if I had a fire sale, worst case scenario, I had a fire sale, every single one of these homes, I'd be able to get my money back out of this. That's kind of how I viewed it. Nice. And we went to look at the homes. They were in pretty horrific shape. Most of the AC units have been stolen. Over the years, just every single one of them needed a full remodel. And we took pretty nasty pictures and we sent it to the bank. This realtor had never even been in any of these homes, and we tried to use that as leverage. And we ended up buying the thing for like $200K. So we got a massive discount because
Wow.
it had been sitting on the market for like a year. Number one, poor listing. Number two, bad broker. Number three, there was no revenue. Four, the homes were in bad shape. I mean, it just had a lot of things working against it.
Sure.
And we picked it up for it's either 200 or 210. But anyway, we always like to go to the local city municipality and meet with the mayor if we can, meet with their his council, meet with whoever we can to kind of let them know what our plan is, right? Because this place was an eyesore and it happened to be almost catty corner from the mayor's office. I mean, so the mayor and the chief of police had to drive past this place all the time. And so we made this, this pitch. My partner and I went up there. He had mayor and he had like 7 other staff members there, and the chief of police was in there. Code enforcement was in there. He had everyone. And this guy was a pretty intimidating dude. He was like 6'3", bald, handlebar mustache. His name was Bobby Cartwright, Mayor Bobby Cartwright. He had like stuffed foxes on the wall. I mean, it was like a really weird, uncomfortable environment. And we gave him this grandeur pitch of what we were going to do this park across the street. We are going to make it so much nicer. We're going to do new roads, landscaping, renovate all these units, do background checks on people so we don't have a drain on your police resources. And he let us talk about 20 or 30 minutes, didn't say a word, and then we stopped. And he basically looked at us. He said, "You guys are wasting your money." He's like, "I've been trying to shut this park down for the last 2 or 3 years, and I'm not going to stop until that thing is wiped off the map." He's like, "So I would suggest that you take your money and you go invest it somewhere else because we don't want you and we don't need you." And that
Wow.
was it.
And you still did it.
It was a very uncomfortable. Yeah, my part. We walked out of the room. I'm like, "Well, that is not at all what we expected was going to happen, right?" And we looked at each
No.
other. We're like, "For
So how'd the rest of
200K,
this, how'd it work?
I think it's worth the risk because all we have to do is like, as long as we show them, that we are going to do what we say we're going to do." And what we did initially, we had closed on probably like 2 weeks later, and we made an immediate connection with the code enforcement and built a rapport with her. Basically said, "Look, we're going to clean this place up. If you see anything, if you notice anything, call us right away. Here's my cell phone number, and it will get cleaned up. We'll fix it, what have you." And so we basically just built a rapport with the code enforcement officer, and brought 3 crews in, started renovating things, kicked out the couple of tenants that were in there, the squatters, basically is what they were. And then started the big renovation process. And then part of the way through the renovation process, we still, it's sort of bad reputation. So people are still coming in trying to dump stuff illegally and trying to do drug deals in there and things like that. People are still breaking into units and stealing AC units. And so what we did is we renovated one of the very front units and we donated it for a year to the police department and made it a substation for them. So we put the electric on, the heat on, AC, and stocked the fridge, and let them use it as a substation, which allowed them to basically have a presence there, which ultimately lowered the drain on the resources because people stopped coming there. Very quickly, the word spread that this is no longer the place to do illegal activities. And the mayor, the long story of this all, the mayor called me, Mr. Mayor Bobby Carr. We did not have any interactions during this year and a half of us turning around this park at all. And he called me on my cell phone a year and a half into it and said, "Mr. Bupp, this is Mayor Bobby Cartwright. I just want to take a moment. I feel like I owe you an apology." And anyway, he went on to say like he originally thought mobile home parks were the problem. You guys have basically proven to me that they're not. He's like, "I was pretty surprised that you ended up buying it with the thread I gave you." And he went in turn to write me a pretty stout recommendation letter that ultimately we've used many times again with municipalities that have had issues with us coming in and potentially buying a park that's in distress and saying we're going to turn it around. Because a lot of municipalities just have a bad taste in their mouth. A lot of people talk big and they never do it. But ultimately, we've used that letter many times over again to give a city a level of comfort that we're going to do what we say we're going to do and we're going to fix things up. So anyway.
That's a great story. That's awesome. That's a good idea too, to have the police right there. We've offered policemen free housing many a times, and it's never worked. Like, "Hey, come live here, bring your squad car," and we've never really get anybody to take us up on it. So we had to hire some moonlight cops and stuff like that. But man, to get to the substation there, that's great.
I think with this one, just because it was literally right across from it was right across where the police station was. I mean, I wouldn't even say they necessarily used it as a substation. Like they just knew they would park a car there often. A lot of times there wouldn't be any officers inside, but they just knew that it would, in the long run, it would help them lower the call rates from that park, because that park got so many calls. It was truly a drain. This was like it was in Atlanta MSA, but it was a small little town, incorporated town. And so, I mean, they didn't have a massive police force, and any calls they got from that place was a drain on their
Sure.
resources. So they knew that the long-term game, it would ultimately help, and it would help us change the reputation and the image, of that place. And it did. And ultimately, one of the mayor's staff member, she ended up living in that community for a number of years thereafter, which was kind of interesting as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, getting on the good side of the city is key. And
Yeah.
I'm with you that sometimes they just don't want to believe it. I had a
Mhm.
city that I used to be outside legal counsel to, so I knew the city, I knew the mayor, and I saw this park came up for sale. And at the time, I was no longer legal counsel. I was doing retail development and looking at some other apartment development as well. And the economic development director for the city called me and said, "Hey, this trailer park is going for sale, and we got 12 trailer parks. We want to get rid of them. And this seller is willing to change the use." And we told them, if the right developer comes along, we'll give them every tax incentive under the book to make it go away. So if you buy this and either put in senior housing or multifamily apartments, class A, we'll give you property tax abatement for 25 years.
Mhm.
And I said, look, it's just, the ground's not worth it. I said, the value of the ground is $1 million. The park's going to sell for more than that, more than $1 million. There's ground in a better location that's better suited for multifamily and senior housing. So I said, it's going to be a trailer park. So it's either going to be another California buyer that's not watching it, it's raining in the ground, or it's going to be me. And they didn't know that I was doing mobile home parks on the side.
Mm.
So it's like, oh, you're kidding me. We called you thinking you would make it go away. And I was like, I told him, I said, I'd like to buy it, but as a mobile home park. And I had done some retail in that town too. So I wanted to have a good, I still own a commercial building in that town. So I didn't want to rub them the wrong way. So I said, do I have permission to bid on this? And they said, no. And I didn't. And 3 or 4 months went by, and it was getting ready to be listed. That's when my dad came in town. We sat down with the mayor, city manager, economic development director, and said, look, this is going to be a trailer park. It's us or somebody you don't know. Do I have permission to bid on this? And they said, okay, fine. But the mayor put me in his SUV and drove me around every park in town and showed me all the vacancies, showed me that one's got 100, that one's got 20, this one's a drug dealer, this one's this. Somebody was killed in that one. He goes, I'm just trying to tell you, you don't want to own a trailer park in this town. And I said, well, I'm willing to take that shot. Kind of like you said there, and with the dad there, and the whole father son combo, we can get this done. And we bid on it, and we got it bought, and uh, we filled 60 lots in 18 months in that park.
Wow.
I mean,
Wow.
we're talking
New homes or used homes
mostly
or?
new, about 10 used, about 50 new. I wouldn't sell that park today for 5 million. I bought it for 1,000,003 two
Mhm.
and a half years ago. And it was because I had to pitch the mayor on it. We delivered. And I haven't gotten that apology letter, but I need to get that. But I'm asking for an expansion of that one. The planning guy's on board. The mayor's not on board yet. But that would be my apology letter. Is he lets me expand it.
Yeah.
So anyway, the key to the key point there is if you've delivered. You said what you're going to do, and then you did it. You fulfilled your promise and your goal, and then you got the benefit of it financially and
Mhm.
reputationally, and for the next deal. And that's what I was able to do a little bit on this one here. So that's just great, and it's good for the industry, right? We are talking earlier about
Absolutely.
reputation industry. Like there's a legitimate operator doing a good job to improve a crime problem and a homelessness problem or whatever else in the community and turn it into something great.
Yeah, you'll have some cities that still won't get on board. We had one in North Carolina that even after providing the letter, Mayor Cartwright even called that mayor, and they just weren't having it. Like they were steadfast in their belief that mobile home parks are what create the crime in their area. That's where all the shootings happen. That's where all the drug deals happen. I mean, that wasn't the case, but what's what they thought, and that's what their beliefs were. And so the interesting what they did is they instituted kind of on the fly some restrictions on, because this the park we bought had 50 vacant pads, all developed, all had homes on them in the past. Most of them got repoed during the chattel crisis back in 99 2000, and they instituted on the fly some restrictions on what type of homes could be brought in, and they were trying to charge us like impact fees again, like fees that the developer had already paid when he developed this property. and we had to sue them. We had to sue the town, and we won. We actually
Yeah.
won it, but it took about a year and a half, and cost a good bit of money. But
Yeah.
we had to basically take them to court, which was unfortunate. But we came out ahead, and we brought homes to that park and haven't had any friction since.
Yeah, that's the hard way. That's good you won, but yeah, that's I have to threaten that all. I try not to threaten loss, but I threaten it. It feels like once a week, and it's often a bluff. 'Cause it's like I don't want to go through this
Yeah.
brain damage, or for my clients, like they don't want to pay to go through this brain damage. So it's great that you were victorious, but man, I'm sure that was a brutal process.
So the advice is, what we did there, and this might not work in every state, but most every state has a manufactured housing association. Some are much more active than others, right? I mean, there's some states that, like in Maryland, they have one, but I've never been able to get a hold of anyone there. I don't think you can become a member. I mean, it's a joke. And but this was in North Carolina, and they've got a fairly active association. And we basically just we called up and found out who the association, who their legal counsel was. That legal counsel, they had been well versed in MHC law, especially as it applies to North Carolina. So who to know better about the laws of that state as they apply to mobile home parks than the same law firm that the association uses. So anyway, that might not be applicable for all associations, but North Carolina is a very active one.
Yeah.
So they've got good counsel behind them as well. And so that guy was a huge help. He didn't have to go research a lot of things. He didn't have to spend time and, hours upon hours charging us $450 an hour to
Oof.
research and, get up to date or up to speed as to, what the laws are.
Yes, I know
That's
clients
where,
hate that. Yeah,
that's where it gets very expensive.
very expensive, very quick. Kevin, this is a great discussion, great stories. Before we part, any other last words, or if not, where can people find you? How can they reach you?
Yeah, I don't think any lasting words. Just it's a great niche. It's a great industry. Lots of great people like Ferd and myself in the industry. It's fun, right? You get to meet
Yeah.
cool people, and I like to see like a lot of the new young bloods coming in. Right, there's kind of like the old generation, now the younger generation. So that's exciting. But as far as reaching me, two different ways. Our company website, sunrisecapitalinvestors.com. There you can go find out about all of our activities in the mobile home park and parking spaces. And then my personal website, kevinbupp.com. There you can get links to, I host two different podcasts. One's called the Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow podcast, which is a commercial real estate investing show. And then we also do the mobile home park investing podcast, which there's links to that on my own personal site. Again, kevinbupp.com. So.
All right. Sounds good, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's
All right.
been a lot of fun.
You got it. Bye now.